Bob's got a new video out. Code Milky Green, everybody. Code Milky Green.
Hello, I'm Bob Smeerfak, but not really. This series is designed for theological seminary students with approaching exams who have not had time to read the Bible, and for book burners looking for dangerous literature to eradicate. Just print out a transcript of this series and fire up your Zippo. Matthew chapter 18. Let's go. In this chapter, Jesus' compadres need to know where they stand in the spiritual world rankings. So Jesus grabbed a young tyke and said they had to grow down to his or her level or they wouldn't make it into the Sky House. But he said to make it to the top of the Sky House rankings, you had to get all meek like this kid, and that if you accept one of these tots, it's the same as accepting him. Then the flip side. If you mistreat any one of these minors who acknowledges that Jesus is the Messiah, you might as well be strapped to a block of granite and dropped in the Mariana Trench. It's not clear whether you're off the hook if you mistreat an atheist child. Jesus went on to express his overall concern about making good people stumble off the narrow way, and he said, basically, that shit's gonna happen, but too bad for you if it's because of you. A few of the Jesus boys must have nodded off during the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 5, because Jesus saw fit to give a refresher here on the whens, whys, and hows of self-amputation. In terms of hands, feet, and eyes, if you can't keep them from screwing up, it's better not to have them. Cut off or gouge out, then throw away. Better that than to be fully mobile or fully sighted, but have a mandatory invitation to God's eternal hot-as-hell cookout. And Jesus said don't go hating the scalawags he was talking about before, because there's a bunch of angels up in the sky house looking out for them who have a direct line to the Father part of himself. Then he said the Son part of himself was concentrating on recovering all the ones who got away down here. He summed up his feelings about it using a sheep analogy. A shepherd's got 100 sheep, and one disappears up in the canyon. Does he leave the 99 and head up into the hills to grab the one, or doesn't he? And if he can get his hands on it, is he more nuts about this one sheep than the others who had the sense not to get lost, or isn't he? The answer, of course, is yes, and yes. Obviously, he's referring to the union of all-or-nothing shepherds, not the pragmatic shepherds union, who might consider doing the math and guard the remaining 99% from wolves, or maybe even hire a private sheep investigator to go hiking after the 1% who decided to do some solo grazing. Either way, Jesus said more or less that the Father part of himself had instituted a policy of no sheep left behind. Jesus was on a roll with the boys, and decided to cover some helpful procedures on interpersonal conflicts. He said, if a friend pisses you off, do it like this. Spend some quality time alone together and lay it out for him. If that does the trick, you can high-five it and move on. If he doesn't agree with you, then take another friend or two with you and spell it out for him again so you can have an impartial transcript of the proceedings. If he still doesn't come around to your way of thinking, then get the church involved. If the weight of the church doesn't set him straight, then you can treat him like an atheist or an IRS employee. Then he gave them all the keys to God's Cadillac and said that spiritual vehicle would get driven in heaven anywhere they drove it down here, emphasizing that if two of them drove it together down here, then God would personally drive it in heaven. And anytime 2 or 3 of them were riding around in God's Cadillac, just look over and you'll see Jesus himself riding shotgun. Peter had another question. He wanted a good round number for how many times he had to put up with shit from a friend. He said, is 7 enough? How about 7 times? But Jesus had him fire up his mental abacus and multiply that by 11. 77 is your number. Metaphorical or literal, your job is to put up with a lot of shit. But Jesus liked a juicy story more than a dry equation, so he laid out a fictional scenario for Peter. He said Heaven Incorporated was set up like a boss who's going to do a performance review of his staff, but he found out one of his crew owed him $140 million. Then he put it in order to sell the guy, his wife and kids, and all his stuff to settle the debt, which implies that a family of 4 and their belongings can be worth a lot of money. But that freaked the guy out because he got down on the floor and begged for more time to pay it off. The boss was genuinely touched, and he decided to wipe the slate clean. You're off the hook, dude. But then that same guy went out and tried to choke another guy on the crew who owed him $16 and said pay it back. So the guy who was getting choked freaked out and he begged for more time. But the choker said, up yours, and sent the guy to prison. So then the other guys on the crew were like, dude. And they ran it up the flagpole to the boss. And the boss was cheesed. He dialed up the guy and said, hey asshole, I let you declare total bankruptcy. Why couldn't you go out and play the nice guy with your fellow employee? And that was it. The boss locked him up in a torture room until he could pay up. And Jesus said that's exactly what Heaven Incorporated was like. And what God would do to you if you don't play the mercy card on your buds when they diss you. Of course, the difference with Heaven Incorporated, by all accounts we've seen so far, is that God's torture room doesn't ease up on you when you learn to play nice. Once you're in, you're in. Don't watch the clock. It ain't gonna stop spinning. Next in this series, we'll move on to chapter 19. Spoiler alert, eunuchs, eunuchs, eunuchs. And what do they have to do with divorce? As always, I'm not a religious figure, but if you want me to save you or damn you to hell, I'll do my best.
I've only got one thing to say to you, Bob Smeerkat. Bob, Bob Smeerfak. Fuck. Every goddamn time. Son of a bitch.